Um, we could start. We could see this is a mono repo. There's a total of three mono repos in this library. The second one is build, and this is our directory where all of our WASM contracts get built. And this library builds a series of contracts in different folders. See those next. So we have the audited ones, and these are the ones that Vite and Richard talked about: direct debit, firewall, high value, and savings. And then we have this is the toolbox, and this is probably what I like the most because this breaks down all the sort of things you might do into small tiny pieces. So for example, hook on incoming outcome. So this just shows a very simple example of how to filter or hook on filter on how to filter on the account. And this would show that it would everything under here would be on an outgoing transaction, and every here is on an ingoing transaction. It's just more and more. This one filters on the token, this one filters on XRP, this one is the hook on. um, this one actually doesn't filter, that just shows whether or not it was a strong execution, a weak execution, or a weak hook again. We have some examples of keylets as well. So a keylet is when you want to access like a ledger index object. So if you wanted to look up a URI token or an account balance in this case, this is how you would look up the account balance. And then we have to set the slot and then grab the slot field balance, and then that balance is here. So kind of hopefully did some heavy lifting for people to see, oh, this is how I get this object, and then I can manipulate the balance here or check something on that balance. This is an example of doing it on the trust line. So again, we use the keylet on the line with the information that's required to get the index. All of them are different. There is a cool tool right here for creating your keylet hash and figuring out and making sure you have that all correct. So um, continue again. It's you set the slot, grab the slot subfield, the balance, and this is an example of parameters. So this one shows actually both the hook parameter, the outgoing transaction, or sorry, originating transaction parameter, and then this one shows just a transaction field. And the goal here was to show the similarity between the drops and how you access that information. So a big thing at this point to say is that it's really important to understand that all these numbers are in Indian, and in XRPL they're big Indian, and in WASM they're little. And because we're compiling this bytecode, we don't want to do calculations inside of the hook. So what we do is we turn that value into a little Indian, put that into a parameter, and then send that. So that way we don't end up doing a bunch of flip flop side of the hook. So this is an example of slot subfield. You can, it's the examples in both of these as well. This just shows it as a more simple example. We have examples of state. So a basic state, this is a counter. It just counts the state, just one after another, just so that we can record it. This is a foreign state, and this one's interesting because exercises some of the more advanced features, the grant, and the ability to interact with someone else's hook. So what this one does is shows the variables that are involved to get that hook. So you need the foreign account namespace, and we put those in through hook parameters. Um, we have the utility SHA 512. This is helpful for those keylets if you need to calculate them on the fly. In this case, it's creating a custom uh, hash based on these variables. And this was pulled from some of Richard's code, just as a core example. And then we have verify, which is you can verify a signature inside of a hook. And so you push in the public key and the message as hook parameters, and then you send in the signature as a transaction. Just in this case, you can obviously do really anything. So that's the toolbox, and then we just have our utilities. These are what I talked about on the top. You have the hook API, the errors, the macro. This is a date utility. We have our second mono repo here. This is required to build the hooks, these two. This is the hook repository. This is required because there's a guard inside of that repository that we use to check to make sure the hook's valid. So we don't like build the hook, try to submit it with it. This is a local RIPL. It basically comes with a standalone for the hook environment and an explorer, and I'll show that in a second. So it's right there, but we're gonna restart it. So we have the source, and there's not a lot going on in here. This application has really one function. It just takes in the client and a series of parameters, which is really just a wallet and a transaction. So it's very agnostic. It's not really built. It's really just built to test these hooks in this directory. There's some libraries, some helpers. There's a couple execution helpers. So we can get the hook executions from a transaction. We can get the hook executions from metadata, and then we can get the emitted transactions. So just sort of parse some of that out. The same thing with the state. This is really more ledger entries. So you can get the hook ledger entry, the hook definition ledger entry, the NS entries, which is pretty much the states, all of the states on the hook, and then get the specific state inside of that. Models and this stuff is really just for submitting transactions. Socket. So we can get into test and we can see maybe some of these. So we just test out all of the sort of the accepts and the rollbacks, and then any calculations that occur. These ones are definitely more tests done. Lots of tests on this one, full-fledged test, and we can sort of, I guess we can go into this now and sort of see I guess some of the wrappers around it. So this is one of the big functions that may be like, pushed with an SDK is create the hook payload. And this really just takes in all of the different things to create a hook. There's many different ways to submit these transactions. So it takes in the version. This is the file that's created in our build directory. We have the namespace, any flags, the hook on array, hook parameters, and any hook grants. And so we can just compile that, and then we've got a hook, and we can then just install that hook very easily. And then now we can go testing the hook. In this case, it's an invoke transaction with different use. So another thing to note that when if you were going to use this library, most people probably wouldn't, but it starts up with 3 accounts and then a gateway and then an issued currency. So you always have that on test context, which is helpful. So continuing going through, we have this tools directory, which builds the hooks, cleans it, and then we have an install. And this is the first one you would run, and it would install your submodules, install the WASM, install the hook cleaner, and then build the guard checker as I talked about earlier. So that's going through it from the top to the bottom. If you were to use this library, you would come in through the package. That's the first thing you would want, or I guess the README. But you're looking for the scripts you can do, and that make setup is what I talked about with install. It's up here. So it installs the tools you need, and then this is the transaction to build the hook. So what we do is we have another helper function called just make build hooks that builds all of our hooks for us. So if we were going to go through the README first, you install this JQ library, and that helps us connect the config file. Here I spoke about those accounts we start up with, and then all of our hooks configured so that we can build them all. Then you'd run the setup, build. That will build all of our hooks for us. We built our hooks, and now we're going to run what we're first going to do here, run our standalone. That just opens up our standalone as a Genesis with all of our amendments enabled. Everything's really pre-set up for you. And then, like I said, it has the Explorer. Oh, it's connected. So now let's run one of our filter on eye. That's where we'll start. So this is, as I say, is going to set up those initial accounts. It's going to issue the token. It's going to set the trust line, pay them, and then we can see up here. So all of those actions that occurred, and then the last two. This one should be set hook 3. Yeah, we're on 30. 33 is the set hook. So you action, and another window that I always have a little guy. This quickly read it. Filter on outgoing transaction, and obviously our test passed. Filter on. This is the one that ran, so it just invoked on that account on a specific contract. So basically, just said filter on whether or not it's an outgoing transaction or incoming transaction. In this case, it was outgoing. So let's do the same thing with the hook builder. Technically, in the hook library, the hook API is nested, so that's why I have these temp. But this same one should be here filed. So we'll linear so we can see. So let's first check it's not gonna hook on any specific type of transaction, so that won't matter. So let's first do out. Set this invoke here. Outgoing. Alice's. So filter on outgoing. So we can see that outgoing was hit, and then filter on end, and well, that would return it, but filter on end did not get, hit. So working as we would expect. Flip it around and go Bob to Alice. Filter on start and then end. So it's not. So it did everything we wanted to do. It just shows a basic way to filter the transaction.